Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a Premier Field Engineer specializing in System Center technologies. Today's discussion is part 7 of an ongoing series dealing with software updates in Configuration Manager 2012. Today's session will be the last session in this series, and we'll specifically focus on the idea of automation when it comes to software updates. So a bit of discussion about that as we get started. The examples that will be shown as part of this session are simply here to provide some thoughts and insights and maybe stimulate your own thoughts about ways that you can bring automation into software update management in Configuration Manager 2012. Some of these examples may be perfectly suitable for the environment that you're in right now. Could be that they're not, but might give you your own ideas. That's cool. So it's not really about trying to provide a specific solution for the environment, but to hopefully help you get creative about ways to provide solutions. These are all demo scripts, so bear that in mind. Kind of as is, tweak them if you want to, adjust them for your needs if they work, but make sure you fully take responsibility for testing and so on. Right? Okay. So really, just going to walk through 6 scripts that have been put together to show how you might bring automation into the environment, and with an eye toward so many environments that I work in, customers are monthly with software updates spending their time doing things like creating deployments, doing things like maintenance of your software update groups and deployment packages and so on, that when that is a task that humans do, it's open to human error. It's open to conflicting priorities where maybe one month it's forgotten. There's a number of places where things could go wrong. Whereas if we identify the processes that we need to do and then bring automation to bear to help with those processes, it gives a better experience for what you're trying to do. Also frees up some time that you might could focus on some other things. So let's just start kind of top down. We'll go example by example and just work through these sample scripts. Also, before I get to the scripts, bear in mind that when you talk about automation, there's a number of ways that you could bring automation to bear in the environment. Could be something that you do through System Center Orchestrator, and certainly these scripts could be set to take advantage of the automation brought by System Center Orchestrator. You could run these scripts manually. You could run them on a schedule, even through ConfigMgr, maybe against the site servers in some cases, or whatever, right? But these are all PowerShell scripts that have varying levels of complexity, right? So that's another quick tangent before we get into it. So in ConfigMgr, we have a whole series of commandlets that are available to help us do automated things against ConfigMgr and PowerShell. Certainly these scripts leverage those commandlets where it makes sense, but not everything that these scripts do are available to be done in commandlet specific example. Whenever I get to the bottom one where we're maintaining the deployment packages, the tools that are needed to actually make that happen are not available in a commandlet, but they are available through other means, and that's how I leverage them. I'll point that out whenever I get there, right? All that to say, understanding PowerShell, it's kind of a two-pronged approach. It's more than that, really, but it can be thought of maybe in 2 buckets in my mind. One is understand the commandlets that are available in PowerShell, ConfigMgr, non-ConfigMgr. Those will help you a long way down the road to getting things done. There are times when commandlets alone are not going to solve your issue. It's not that it can't be done in PowerShell, it can, but you're going to need to understand some more basic scripting kind of structures to be able to get that done, and you'll see some examples of both of these through these scripts, right? So okay, let's jump in. So the first example, the first 2 examples I'll hit kind of together because they are similar, and this one, as we kind of set the stage for it, talks about a software updating kind of strategy, right? So in many environments where I work with various customers, I see a consistent strategy for software update deployment. The idea is that folks will tend to split software updates into groups. one group being for the current month worth of updates, or the current quarter, or whatever it is, right? The ones that we expect to be most active, in my case monthly. And then another group that's for persistent software updates, those that we expect to be needed in some cases in the environment, maybe a system getting rebuilt, maybe a new system coming online, whatever, but the vast majority of the systems in the environment should already be patched by the updates that are in that persistent group. So, there's a number of ways I see folks build these groups and split them up. That's the beauty of ConfigMgr and software updates, is we give you a ton of flexibility to do what makes sense. But generally the idea is, with the monthly updates, in my case, I expect those to be less compliant because no one has them yet, and I want to be able to watch the compliance increase for that group specifically when I look at reports and such. The persistent group, I expect to largely be in the 90s, for compliance, and don't expect to see a lot of churn there, right? But I still want to be able to see all of the updates that are in the environment, know what my compliance rate is for those deployed updates in the environment, right? And then I see folks you could do it that way. You could just have a monthly group of updates and a persistent group of updates for the entire environment. That's great. I'm of the mind that I don't really ever want to deploy software updates somewhere that I know they will never go. And so I tend to break it down a little bit further. Maybe I'll have a monthly for Windows 7, not breaking it down by architecture or anything like that. That kind of gets a little bit way off in the weeds. But I like the idea of having a monthly for Windows 7, a monthly for Windows 8, a monthly for Server 2008 R2, and so on, right? And then a persistent for each one of those categories. And you target the OS deployments to specifically OS where they apply. Well, there's some updates that don't nicely fall into those categories, like the .NET Framework or the Adobe or the Word or whatever it is, that you can't really focus so nicely. So you do maybe expose them to the entire environment because you don't know where that software is. That's fine too, because ConfigMgr will work through these and only pull what it needs. But my mind is always around, if I can avoid giving a system updates that I know they won't ever need, and that's the key, they won't ever need them, then I want to do that because it's going to reduce the load that the system has to process. It's going to reduce the potential for a negative impact on compliance in case a machine has a difficulty somewhere, that kind of thing. It's also nice to group that way because if there's, say there's 3 categories of systems you're covering, Windows 8, Server 2012, Windows 7, and you're grouping them all together, your compliance for a given month might be down around 70, but you don't know why. Maybe if you had them split, you could see your compliance for Server 2012 was in the high 90s, compliance for Windows 8 was in the high 90s, but when you look at Windows 7, your compliance for that month is down in the 50s. Well, immediately you know then that your challenge is in the Windows 7 machines, not the others, right? Again, just kind of some visual cues that can help you, right, and break things down and make things a little bit easier to understand. Right, sure, a little bit more work maybe on the front end to set up those groups, but with some of the automation I'm going to show you today, maintenance of those groups and care and feeding of those groups can actually be not that big a deal. Again, you're flexible to do however you want to do for your environment, but those are some ideas. Okay, so in my case, let me make sure these groups are set up right first. I have a monthly update group, which contains the updates for the given month is the idea. Then I have a persistent group, which would contain those that have been around for a while. I actually have a base group that I'm just using because as I do demos, I'll need to move updates around and put them back in place. So let me go in and first of all, just make sure my monthly and persistent groups are set up right. So if I show updates here, and then just edit the membership, I want to put all of these updates in just the monthly group. So I'm going to take them out of here. They're all in the monthly group now, and nothing I want in the persistent group. Right, that's empty. So I just want updates in the monthly group. Again, in production, this is not real for production because in production you would have a separate set of updates in the persistent group that would be out there. That's great. In my case, I'm just assuming there's none in there. No big deal either way, but just for some visual impact of what's going on, right? So I've got my okay, non-downloaded updates. That's great. That's fine. We'll get some in there. Actually, here. Let me exclude this one that's not downloaded. Oh, I know what I'm doing. Sorry. Let me clean up from another exercise here that I did. Sorry, let me get that clean and I should be good. There. I have deployments. That's why I can't put those in, because you can't have deployments of non-downloaded software. Right. So I'm just going to get rid of these two. Actually, let me go back to my base. That's where I was. Sorry. Give me a second. I'll have this all adjusted. Okay, so I want my base to only be in monthly. I don't want it in persistent or reporting. So I'm good here. Good. So that should work now. Okay, so if I go over to monthly, then now I'll have just some updates here, those same set of updates. If I look at persistent, there's nothing. So the idea here is you can just look at the membership of this. There's some updates in here that are expired. There's some updates in here that are superseded, right? And I'm kind of fudging this in for demo because in my case, I don't have these deployed. In your case, as updates expire, you could have those update groups deployed. You need to manage them, right? And then there's also the case that in a monthly update group, if you're taking the approach of having a separate group just for those updates for a given month or a given quarter, you don't want updates in this group in an ongoing way that exceed a certain age threshold, right? So part of the maintenance will be to look inside this update group and get rid of those updates that exceed the threshold. So I have a script that I brought to bear that specifically manages this environment. So let me pull up the integrated scripting environment for PowerShell, which is a wonderful tool for scripting and building scripts if you're not familiar with it. And I will specifically go out and open update group pair maintenance. All right. So through the way I run this, all of these parameters I'm setting to true so that I can put them all in the command line. You don't have to run it manually like I'm doing it. You could actually tweak this to automate it so you pass the command line parameters in manually and set the direction and all of that through ConfigMgr, Orchestrator, whatever. Right. But for illustration, we're going to do it through the command line. So you'll see that I have a bunch of procedures in here that are going to go through and handle different things, but the real work of the script is here. So whenever we're passing in, as you'll see in a minute, the pair of update groups, monthly and persistent, the first thing we need to do is maintenance the monthly group. Well, we do that here, and we do that by calling, optionally, a method to handle expired updates. Again, you don't have to do each one of these. You can specify whether you take action on the command line. I'm going to do all of them, right? We have another routine that will go handle the superseded updates. And we lastly have one that will handle, where is it? Oh, up here. I'm in the wrong one. That will handle aged updates, right? So if you have a certain age threshold you want to manage, you can do that. It's up here. Well, then there's the second routine, which is the one I was actually focused on, that goes and handles the maintenance of the persistent group. Well, in that persistent group, you don't really plan to have, what did I just do? Sorry, I scrolled up. Don't know what I did there. Here's my persistent group. So for the persistent group, you don't really plan to have a need to manage aged updates. In your persistent group, you expect the updates there to be older. So here I'm just simply allowing handling of superseded or expired updates within that persistent group because you don't want superseded or expired updates. Expired for sure, superseded you might have some decisions to make around that. You don't want expired updates in your groups. That's going to skew results. So what I'm going to do is just run this, right? So put in the IP address, and you can put the name too, I just for convenience, IP address, the site code of my server. The current update group is monthly. The persistent update group, in my case, is persistent. So you would do these in pairs. So if you did have that breakdown, Windows 7 monthly, Windows 7 persistent, Windows 8 monthly, Windows 8 persistent, you could just run this and have it automated and run it against each of the pairs, and it will work the same, right? And then I'm going to be asked whether I want to handle aged updates. Well, in my case, I do. right? And I just created these groups for testing, so I don't have the kind of age threshold that you would expect in production, so I'll just force it to 2 days. And then do I want to purge expired? I'm going to say true. And do I want to purge superseded? I'm going to say true. So with all of that in place, all I do is set this off in motion, and it's going to go through and run against the environment, and then come back and tell me what it did. So I have 8 updates in the monthly update group. It's going to clean those superseded updates. It's going to tell me what updates it's handling. It's also going to clean updates older than the specified threshold, and then ultimately tell me how many updates we're putting in to the persistent group based on the movement associated with cleaning the age threshold stuff, right? And then also I'm cleaning some expired updates here. So if I then go back and look and refresh my monthly group, we don't have any updates there because I got them all, right? In practice, you may be that way, maybe not, but now at least this group is empty, so it's ready to receive the next batch of updates. If you're doing kind of a quarterly kind of thing, maybe you're going to have some updates that remain in here because of the age threshold, but either way, right? And if I look in persistent, the only updates in here are the ones that are actually actionable. The superseded, the expired ones are gone, right? Okay. So let me reset the table here for a minute before we go on to the next one. So I'm going to reset this. All I want is these updates in my monthly group now. So that's for the update pair. Well, you may not have update pair or update group pairs, right? Not everyone does. But you still may want to maintenance your update groups in an automated way. So in addition to the pair script, there's one that's in here for sample that basically just handles an individual update group for maintenance. And it's basically the exact same thing, except I only have one area where I take action in here. I don't try to do it against the second group, right? I still do allow for you to manage by an age threshold if you choose to, but it's optional. All these are optional, right? So I'm going to run this now, and I'm just going to do it against monthly. And I'm going to handle aged updates. Well, I'm going to cancel that because I can't type apparently. So let's try it again. And I'm going to say again, I'll do 3 this time, see what it does. And yes, I want to do that. And yes, I want to do this. And so off to the races it goes, connecting up, and we'll take care of the maintenance, right? Clean superseded update. And cleaned expired. So I didn't actually hit the age threshold, which is fine, but I did remove 2 updates from this group. So if I look at, so this is the set that I put in there, which is 8. So if I look in monthly now, I should have 6. And that's exactly what I have, right? Okay, so another thing about these scripts that I've really tried to do for anyone who's interested is really comment through what I'm doing in these scripts, so that if it is something that kind of aligns with maybe something that would work in an environment that that you're in, you can see this, tweak it maybe if you want to for your environment. Again, these are demo scripts, so treat them as such and make sure that you test anything you do thoroughly. But again, to stimulate some ideas. Okay. So what's next? So other things we have. So evaluate number of updates in groups, right? So this is one I really can't show really effectively, because this is one that would be more effective in environments that have been around for a while, right? But I'll show it to you anyway. So manage software update, evaluate number of updates in groups, right? This is a pretty simple PowerShell script. But the idea is really interesting for environments of any size, or not of any size, meaning any environment, whether you're big or small, could take advantage of something like this. So here's the idea. In software update groups in ConfigMgr 2012, you cannot have more than 1,000 software updates in a given software update group if that software update group is deployed. If it's not deployed, you can exceed 1,000, no problem. And you might want to in some cases. We'll talk about one possible case later. But if it's deployed, no, you cannot. And so what happens sometimes is as you go along, maybe you aren't at the threshold for updates, but you're getting close, but someone forgets to keep looking, and all of a sudden it's time to deploy updates, and you realize, oh no, I don't have enough room in the software update group because I'm over 1,000 updates now, right? Well, it'd be nice to know that in advance. And so this script, the idea is it's just going to go out and check any update group that is deployed. The ones that aren't deployed, it doesn't care about. And you can see that this is the measurement here to make sure that it's deployed, right? If it's deployed, we want to scan through that group and find out if our group count is above 900. It should be 900. I was editing this earlier, so I'll just put it back to 900. Being alerted at the threshold of 900 should give us enough time to do any maintenance we need, right? And avoid having problems, right? But we want to know that. So I can envision this kind of thing running routinely in the environment, just checking, letting you know. In the case of the script, all it does is it tells you by writing to the console if you're in that scenario. But you could easily automate something like this in Orchestrator to tie in mail and send a mail alert to a group or whatever, when that situation arises. So this is just another idea of the kind of routine checking that typically humans need to do, but we don't have to have humans do it. We can let the system do it and just let you know proactively if you're approaching a problem, right? All right. So you could even give the specific count. So I didn't give the specific count here, but I could even tag that in to tell you, okay, it not only exceeds 900, it's currently at 980, right, or something like that. Pretty easy. Okay, so that's that. Well, what else do we have? So here we have a deploy software update. So this is an interesting one, right? So there's a lot of customers that I work with that every month they're in the business of going out and creating 30, 40, 50 deployments. Maybe they have 5 or 6 software update groups, and they have to go out and manually create those deployments every single time. Well, why do that whenever you can leverage PowerShell quite effectively to automate it? And here's the other thing. When you're going out and creating that many update deployments, or even if it's 2 or 3 or 1, you have the potential in any kind of interaction that you do to introduce human error into the equation. Whereas if we let automation handle it, we know that the work is going to be consistent. Now, you still could have human error whenever you're setting up some of the input files, which you'll see in a minute, but it lessens it, right? Because it's not as routine that you're just doing it over and over and over again. So that's the idea, is whatever your situation is, however many update groups you have, let's let the automation actually take care of creating the deployments. So in my case, let me go adjust my environment real quick. So I want to make sure that in my monthly group I have some updates. That's cool. I also need some updates in my persistent group. Doesn't really matter what they are. They just need to be valid. So I'm going to edit and just take these 3 and put them over in persistent. Okay. So, and the reason I need that is because in my example, I'm specifically creating deployments to each one of these groups. And just to show there are no current deployments, or shouldn't be. If there are, I'll get rid of them, on either monthly or persistent. There aren't, right? So if I go to PowerShell then, the first thing is I need an input file. Very simple. In my case, I'm just using a text file. In your case, you could use Excel, you could use SharePoint, you could use whatever makes sense for you to use. But here, I'm just using a text file. So it's very simple, right? Each line represents an individual deployment, and the elements of that deployment are separated by a comma. I'm just using 3 elements. Often, very likely, you'll have many more elements, maybe 10 or 15 elements that you'll need to describe a given deployment. That's fine. In the text file example, you could just separate those with commas. In Excel, you could put them in different columns, whatever makes sense. The script is designed to read input from a text file and handle. So there will, at the end of this, be one deployment for the monthly group, one deployment for the persistent with different names, and they're both going to go against all systems, right? So the way that's handled in the script is that I simply open up the text file right here, right? And then I'll loop through every entry, and I'm using standard VB kind of string manipulation to split the string every time I see a comma and store the elements that result in individual variables. So if you did have 10 items that you wanted in each line of the script, that's great. This is really easy to change. Just create a new variable name for each one that you want to store beyond what's here and assign it to a different level in the array just coming up like you see, right? And then all of these variables are leveraged in the command line for this PowerShell script, right? So, and you'll see this is just a standard ConfigMgr commandlet that's available to start a new deployment. And these options, some of them are hard-coded that I put in, some of them are by variable, so the software update group is coming in by the update group name, the collection name by variable, the deployment name by variable. Some of these other items, description created by PowerShell, deployment type is available instead of required, how verbose it is, time zone, all these different things. So the kinds of things you would create in PowerShell, in the console, deployment availability date, all these things, right? The things you would create in the console as you walk through the wizard, you can very easily create in PowerShell. And if you're spending 4 hours a month creating all these deployments, well, now you reclaim that and have it to do something else, right? So let's run this. So all I need is to tell it where the site server is, and it's going to go out now and create the deployments. No big deal. It's reading the file, creating the deployments. Should be done. Now, no error, no input. Maybe you could put a tagline in, okay, created deployments or whatever. That's fine if you want to do that. If you were creating a deployment against a software update group that had updates in it that were not deployed, you would get an error at this stage because you can't create deployments against a group that has updates in it that are not deployed. In this case, we're good with that. No problem. And so we did create both of the deployments. So if we go look at it, and here now, let me just go down to monthly, or up to monthly. Here I see monthly and the deployments, and the deployment is there. There's a couple of them here. Let's see. And you'll see created by PowerShell. You'll see all systems. You'll see some of these other settings that's available. Scheduling when it's available. All these things came from PowerShell, right? If you go down to persistent, deployment, same thing. I've got a couple of them in there. No big deal, right? And the same kind of attributes. All right. So, again, think about the ways this can help you. The routine things that you're spending all your time doing, creating maintenance windows every month, creating deployments every month, whatever it is, we can automate a lot of that and make it easier on you for repeatable actions, right? PowerShell is a great cog in the wheel for that. All right, so that's that one. All right, now a couple more that I'll show you. I'll show you these together so I don't keep flipping back and forth. Reporting software update group. This one's again, may not fit exactly in the scenario, but this came from actually working with a customer. So here's the idea, right? And let me make sure that I don't have any updates in the reporting group. If I do, I'll purge them for the demo. I don't think I do. Yeah, I do actually. Okay, so let me edit membership on that and get rid of it. Reporting group. Okay, so here's the idea. So one of the customers that I work with has a need, and this hits a lot of customers, to comply with PCI. And I'm not a PCI expert, but according to what they were describing, they really want an all-up software update group that will allow them to see all of the deployments across the board in their environment and report them collectively in the various ConfigMgr reports. Well, that's great because, as I mentioned, you can have more than 1,000 updates in an update group that is not deployed. So for reporting purposes, it's great. The challenge is making sure that all of the updates across your infrastructure are in this group. So, and very often I even was talking with them, they would indicate, well, we just have missed some things historically. Well, let's make sure that you don't miss anything. So the idea is let PowerShell take an input of the group that you want to use for reporting, and then go scrape every other group, software update group in the environment, and make sure that the updates that are in those other groups show up in reporting as well, so that you have an all-up view of your environment in reporting. Maybe you run it once a month or something like that, right? And here's the other thing. I'll just mention this. Probably goes without saying, but all of the demos that I'm showing here assume that you're leveraging software update groups for deployment and management of updates in the environment. Maybe you're not, and that's okay, because you certainly can deploy groups without, or deploy updates without having software update groups. But software update groups make a lot more sense, makes it easier, organized, whatever. So if you're using software update groups, these demos absolutely apply, and expect software update groups. If you're doing anything individually on updates, first I would encourage you to really think through why you're doing that, because it can make things a little bit harder to keep track of. And two, these scripts don't cover those kind of scenarios, right? Okay. But in this case, if we're just using software update groups, we want to have an all-up picture, that's great, we can. So looking through this, let me refresh. The reporting group should be now empty, right? But if we look across the various groups we have one update and test accuracy. It's here. It should be the only update place that this shows up is in this group. So I'll check it as I walk on through, 7,500. If I look in monthly, I'll have a certain number of updates, right? So that one, 7,500, is not there. If I look in persistent, I'll have a certain number of updates. And if I look in base, I'll have a certain number of updates, right? A lot of overlap between these three, and that one's not there either. So this one up here is unique. So the idea is we want a mechanism to roll up through all of these, or if you had more, you can roll up through all of them and make sure the membership up here reflects all of these cumulatively. All right? So let's just run this. Again, very, very easy script, but useful if you're in this kind of environment where you need it. File open. Okay, so reporting software update membership. So all I'm going to do is take input of what the reporting update group will be, and then I'm going to get all of the software update groups with this commandlet, loop through every single one of them, and just go ahead and try to add every update I find across all of the groups into my reporting group. If the update is already there, no big deal. It's not going to add it twice, not going to error, but by forcing it to try to add every single one, we get consistency, right, up top. So let's just run this now. All right, so off we go, and it's going to scrape through them all. Takes a minute here. Should be largely done at this point, but it's still processing through some of the groups. And now we're done. So if we go back and look now at the reporting group, we should absolutely see a collective view of all the updates beneath. And we do, right? And here's even that 17,500, right? Like we talked about. So easy enough. All right, cool. So then the last script that I want to show you, and I really like this one, but it's personal preference. It was fun to write, probably is why. So if I pull this one open, so this one is one that specifically maintains software update packages, right here, deployment packages. So here's the idea. Let me pull the console in. So what can happen as you get into software updates over time? It's not intentional, but it just happens sometimes because maintenance is forgotten or whatever. You could have some software updates that are in a given deployment package, but they are not in any software update group for deployment, right? So it's not causing problems necessarily, although you can see some interesting things in that scenario, sometimes with expired updates. But it's, at the very least, it's taking room on your distribution points. It's not efficient. It's not streamlined. There's not a one-for-one match to know that the software updates in your deployment package are at least in some software update group out there. So we can take care of maintaining that by building a script that will first look at every software update that is in your deployment packages one at a time and compare every update that's in the deployment package against all of your software update groups and find out, is this update in at least one software update group? If it is, that's cool, and it needs to stay in the deployment package. But if it's not, why is it in the deployment package, right? So we can actually remove it through PowerShell from the deployment package and force an update of your deployment package to your distribution points, right? But if we find, the software update could show up in 10 different software update groups. As long as we find it in one, we will preserve it, right? And we don't keep searching once we find the first instance. But if we don't find an instance, then that software update becomes one that we need to consider for removal, right? Well, the other side of that is if you have updates in your software update groups that are not in a deployment package, well, that's a challenge as well, because if it's in an update group, the idea is it's probably being deployed, unless it's a reporting group, which I mentioned earlier, and this script doesn't assume reporting groups, though it could be very easily adjusted to exclude searching of that one. Anyway, so if it's in a software update group that's deployed, you need to make sure that the software update is in at least one deployment package. So we'll do the reverse of that, and we'll search all of the software update groups and compare to the deployment package, make sure it's there. If it's not, we're going to tell you. We're not going to force it into a deployment package. That's more of an administrator kind of action to take. But we do at least want to highlight that for you, right? So let's go look at the script. It's a little bit more of a complex script, but I very much comment everything here to show you what's going on. And the real work of this is down here at the bottom. After we do all the comparisons, the way we're manipulating the update group is through this call. And you'll notice there's no commandlet here. It's actually leveraging a method in WMI to remove the content, and then I'm telling it to update the distribution point or the group against your distribution points, the package on your distribution points. So that's the real work, and that's what again highlights what I was telling you earlier. Not everything you want to do can be done through commandlets, but if you understand more than just the commandlet-based scripting, you can do pretty much whatever you want to do. And this happens to be a method that the product group wrote that's in WMI. I'm just taking advantage of that. I'm not actually trying to handle the removal myself. I'm letting the code the product group wrote do that, but I'm taking advantage of it, right? So, all right, let's go through this through a demo and show you how it works. Before I do that, I need to actually set up a couple of things in the environment. So I'm going to download just a few updates and put them into deployment package 1, deployment package 2. Doesn't really matter what they are, because the idea is I'm forcing a situation where I have some updates in my deployment package that are not in any software update groups, and I want to see the system actually purge those. So that's going to go get that one. All right, come on. Done. Okay, now I'm going to go get a few more and put them over in deployment package 2, and I'll show you deployment package 2. I'll just get 2. Let's just get those. Come on. Download. I'm going to put these in deployment package 2. And let me pull this up first. You'll notice in deployment package 2, there is nothing there right now in the update source. So here, there's nothing in my source directory, but as soon as I download these, you'll see data start to show up there. All right, so let me pull this out of the way. There's the first one. So there's actually, notice there's a couple of different folders that are created. Sometimes you'll actually see more. So in this case, there's one folder for each update I selected. Sometimes you'll see a few more than that for a given update. But nevertheless, we've downloaded, right? So now I want to go run this script. So I'm going to run it, tell it the site server, tell it the site code, and that's it. The script's going to go out there and run. It's going to go run, do all the comparisons, and then come back and tell us what it did. So here I found deployment package 1, and I found 3 items that did not have a corresponding entry in the software update group. So I'm getting rid of them and placing that back into action, right? Updating against the DPs. And then here in deployment package 2, I found 2, those first 2 I downloaded. I'm fixing those and resetting it. And then the opposite, I'm looking in all the software update groups to see if there's any deployment package that has these updates, and I found CIID here that is not in any deployments, and it's in this group, and this one in this group is also not in a deployment package. So I'm alerting you of those because that's a potential problem. Well, if you notice in the script, you'll see it. I don't do anything whenever I do a cleanup like this. There's nothing in that script that will actually clean up the source directory for ConfigMgr, right? But if you look at the deployment package 2, you saw those get added. There are no updates here. And if you look at the source directory now, you'll also notice there are no source files here. So whenever you call that remove content method, it handles both. It removes the updates from the deployment package in question, and it removes the source directory from the source files because you're telling it or from the source path because you're telling it, I no longer need these items, right? All right, so that wraps up really what I wanted to show you in terms of examples. I will point you to this URL and give a little bit of a brief discussion about it. So PowerShell is becoming more and more and more the thing for automation, right? Pairing it with Orchestrator certainly is a good thing. What you saw in this demo is just some PowerShell scripts. You also have the ability to leverage PowerShell workflows, which are described at this URL. And there's also this thing through Orchestrator called Service Manager Automation, which leverages PowerShell in an Orchestrator-like structure to do a lot of this automation, which is something really cool to check out as well, right? Automation is the world that we live in. It's getting more and more prevalent. So if this is foreign to you, if you don't understand these things, definitely encourage you to get more familiar with them and so on. The scripts, the demo scripts are in the location where you obtain this video. So take a look at those. Hopefully they're a good learning tool. Just again stress they're demo scripts. If anything inspires an idea, you tweak them a bit and want to use them in production, it's on you for testing those and making sure they're good. All right, and with that we will wrap up our software update series, and we'll see you next time.